Hi everyone, this is Pradeep from Sydney at 11:30 p.m. Yes, it is not midnight as yet. A very happy good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night to whatever it is in your part of the world. I am delighted to welcome you to one another very fascinating session of GCC. As we have been mentioning in the last couple of episodes, the format for GCC has now undergone a change. We present three leaders who are the speakers of the day. And along with that, we also present a leaders panel. And these leaders panel are chosen keeping a multidisciplinary perspective in mind. Not only that, we ask them to give their perspectives as well as ask questions of the speakers of the day on topics of the day which are being discussed, which may or may not necessarily be in their skill set. I mean, that's what we expect the leaders to respond to. So, let me introduce the speakers of the day today. First and foremost, Susan Verghese. Susan, can you raise your hand and say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
Susan is based in Washington, and I've known Susan, I will only say, for a few years now. Susan has been an alumni of IIT Delhi, alumni of Harvard. She was a general manager with TCS at a time when TCS was not what it is. And she's had encounters with some real visionary folks. Not that she is not visionary herself, but apart from that, she's also been with the World Bank for quite a few years. And she has moved away from delivery, from leadership, from IT, more onto governance and risk management. Please give a big round of applause to Susan. After Susan, we will have
Thank you.
Pankaj. Pankaj, can you please raise your hand and say hi to everybody?
Sure,
Pankaj,
sure.
Pankaj is IIT Delhi and IIM Ahmedabad. He is currently the Chief Data and Analytics Officer with the Aditya Birla Group. So he's part of the engine room for the Aditya Birla Group. When I first spoke to Pankaj, I thought that he's a guru in data analytics, and I realized that this man has been reinventing himself so many times. Not only that, but he's also involved in quite a few things. But more about that when we come to Pankaj. Please give a big round of applause to Pankaj. And just to keep the age balance, I had to get somebody who's quite young as compared to some of us in this group today. But he is doing some phenomenally wonderful job with INSEAD. He is the Chief Innovation, or should I say, the Chief Learning Innovation Officer at INSEAD. He's trying to build what he calls as the Netflix of executive education. He's also helped build up executive education for Columbia University. But in between that, he was also an entrepreneur. So, Swapnil, do you want to raise your hand and say hi?
Hello, everybody. Great to be here.
And this man has just put on a beard so that he looks a bit older. Uh, and we then move on to the panel of leaders. And like I always say, the gentleman that I am, I will go with the ladies first. And whom do we have from San Francisco? We have Aditi. Aditi, do you want to raise your hand and say hi to the group?
Hi, everyone.
Aditi was airlifted post her graduation from IIT Delhi to US. I didn't have these opportunities where you were airlifted to another country and you started working with that country, and she was with Deloitte for quite a few years. And then she said, okay, man, enough is enough. And then she said, okay, and now she's taken up a job with, she's go-to-market strategy leader for AWS. Please give a big round of applause to Aditi. And from San Francisco, where do we go? We can either go to Montreal or we can go to Singapore. But sorry, Raghu, I have to, give preference to older people. So not that Yogesh is very old. Let me move across to Singapore and an old friend of mine, Yogesh Dayal. He is a former CEO and director of IBM over a number of countries, and he's also been instrumental in setting up delivery centers in Ireland and in a couple of other countries. And he, guess what? He's an alumni from IIT Kanpur. So as you would have seen over the last couple of sessions, we have already broad-based it to include not only people from IIT, other IITs apart from IIT Delhi, but I am getting requests from other leaders, even Australians in Australia when they're seeing GCC sessions to speak at GCC sessions. So we'll be doing that also in times ahead to come. So Yogesh, can you please raise your hand and say hi? And a big
Hi
round of
everyone.
applause to Yogesh. And from Singapore, we go across to none other than our GCC colleague Raghu Murthy. Raghu, as you will notice, already at a young age is bald, whether by intention or whether by I don't know, uh, because this fellow has been also transforming himself, and he was the CFO for GE Renewable Energy. Then he decided that, oh no, finance is not good enough. So he's currently the global transformation leader for GE Renewable Energy in Montreal. Raghu, if you want to say, raise your hand and say hi, and a big round of
Hello
applause
everybody.
to
Great to be
Raghu.
here.
So enough round of introductions. Let's kick off the session today, and let's kick off with Susan. Susan, now, first of all, tell me, where did you buy this colorful T-shirt of yours? From Macy's or from which is that expensive store? I'm forgetting the name. It's 2.5 years. I haven't traveled to US also.
You're talking to somebody who doesn't like shopping, so I have no idea where I got this from.
Ah, so you just get people just throw gifts at you. I love it. So
Ah,
Susan, tell me, you were a textile engineer at IIT Delhi, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
that's right.
And then how did you end up with TCS? What has been the journey post IIT?
Well, I've had an interesting journey as I look back over my career from the time I left IIT. I know I'll be dating myself, but I passed out from IIT Delhi in 1978. And I was in my batch, there were three of us in textile. I was doing textile technology, and my other two colleagues were doing textile chemistry. So in a sense, we were probably the first women in India to be doing this textile engineering from IIT Delhi. And so, of course, when it came time for campus recruitment, we were the curiosity factor, and we got to go to all the interviews. But as we would walk in after the interview, they would all tell us, if you were a boy, we would have taken you with 2 increments over the starting pay. So it ended up that by the end of our recruitment, we barely had any jobs in hand. I did get a job with a company called Mahindra's, which is the original company that the Mahindras had started, called MMC in Calcutta, where they were manufacturing textile, the machines that make the textiles. So the spinning machines and the weaving machines were all manufactured in this unit in Calcutta. And the only reason I went there for the interview was they were paying our fare for the interview, after the campus recruitment, and my parents had just moved to Calcutta. So I thought, well, I'll get a free ride, go visit my folks and come back. Uh, but by the end of my final year, that was the only job I had in hand. I didn't have offers from any other place. My alternatives were to either continue to do MTech or to, you know, start searching outside. And I just thought this job was in Calcutta. My parents were there, made sense. So I joined them, and I was working in that organization. I started out there by working literally shop floor. So foundry, machine shop, the department where you sort of put the machines together, shipping, stores, inventory, all of those. And what was interesting is the factory workers also had never seen women workers working in any jobs other than as a telephone operator. So I was the only woman executive in the entire factory. And they would fondly come up to me and say, Missy Baba, tumi Bangla jani? And I would go, no. And they'd say, no problem, we'll teach you. So I learned a lot of Bengali over there, over that 1 year that I was there. As part of what I was doing, I had suggested that for the stores, they need to get a computer and they need to put the inventory on computer. And the head of that organization was a gentleman called Mr. Jayant Gupta. And he called me up and said, okay, this was your bright idea, you go do it. You install the computer. And I was like, no, I'm a textile engineer. I know computers because I did a couple of courses in IIT, but I don't want to make that my life. And also at that time, I was getting married, and I was getting married to somebody who got a transferable job. So he called me one day and he said, you need to shift your line. You're never going to get a job in the textile industry because they're never going to accept women. So, we just so that you were taken as an experiment. And there were people in my company who said that a woman will never survive. So we put you in all the places where the people had the most, issues with you being a woman and joining. So I was put in the foundry as the first place because they said she'll never survive over there. And then they put me in the machine shop. And so that way, I feel that his vision of wanting to make a change was a great one. So from there, I got into IT, and then I got into TCS. And from there, my journey for the first 2 decades stayed in IT. Again, while I was there, I started off doing all sorts of work. And I happened to work with some really, really interesting people over there, 2 of whom are kind of well known. One was Mr. F.C. Kohli. So when I joined TCS, I had a 3-year-old child, and I was working over there in the department. And everybody around me would say, oh, we just turned down an offer to go to UK. We've been there before. Oh, we went to Australia. We just came back from Australia. And I would say, I've been here for 2 years. Nobody's ever asked me to go overseas. So in one encounter with Mr. Kohli, I mentioned this, and he said, oh, but you have a child. You would never be willing to go. So I said, leave that to me to decide. Don't decide that for me. At least give me the joy of saying, no, I don't want to go. And I said, and you send people for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks assignments, which I can easily do because I live with my in-laws and they can take care of my child for that short period. And to his credit, he said, I never thought about that. So in a sense, he sent me on my first assignment. Again, I was the first woman in India in TCS at that time with a child to be sent on an overseas assignment. I went and I started working over there. I came back and then I moved to Delhi. So when I was working in TCS Delhi, they were expanding TCS offices all over the world. And my boss at that time was Mr. Pawan Kumar. He's an IITK graduate, and I think Yogesh knows him pretty well too. So Pawan came to me and said, well, where would you like to go as a regional manager? Would you like to go to Brussels or Germany or Paris? So I said, well, I haven't seen enough of the Louvre, so I would rather go to Paris. So I was sent as the resident manager to set up TCS office in Paris. And again, I was the first woman to be sent as an RM. And the interesting thing is, Mr. JRD Tata was still around at that time. And he sent me a note saying, I'm really glad to see that it's a woman who's starting the first branch of a Tata company in France, because he has some French connection. So it was a really exciting ride those couple of years. I came back, and again, I just say that working with people like this, who like Mr. Kohli and Mr. Pavan Kumar, who were willing to take a chance on something that they had never done, kind of opened up my eyes about how I should be dealing with my juniors and other people. And in a sense, they gave me enough rope to do what I wanted. I could either hang myself with it or I could fly. And I think I was able to fly while I was there. I left TCS, and then I did my own startup at a time when it wasn't fashionable to be doing startups. I did that for 2 years, and then I moved back into the Tata fold because they were setting up Tata IBM, or as they called it at that time, TISO. And I started working there, and I was again a deputy general manager over there, looking after the manufacturing sector of the software department. And I met Mr. Yogi Singh, who was my boss over there. And all the while I was in TCS, everybody wanted to work on IBM systems and wanted to go to the US. I was one of the few people who would say, don't want to go to US, never want to work on IBM systems. So I was going to move to Bangalore to work with Rajesh Huku, who was a colleague from TCS, and who had set up CITL, which is Citibank Information Technology Limited. So we had been in discussions, and I was kind of almost ready to take that job up when another ex-TCS colleague of mine told me, why don't you come and at least meet Yogi Singh? So I met Yogi, and Yogi was like, we'd like you to join IBM. And I was like, I don't even know how to spell IBM. I've never worked on an IBM machine. I know nothing about US. Why would you want to hire me? And he says, precisely for those reasons, that you would be one outside voice talking to me. Again, it was a really interesting time because IBM was just setting up in India. So we were recruiting, we were doing sales, we were doing quality, we were trying to get the SEI, CMM, and ISO certifications. So it was hectic, to put it mildly. After a couple of years, Rajesh Huku came back to me, and he was like, you were supposed to work with me. Why did you not join? So then I said, all right, I will leave IBM because I think I'm getting burnt out over here, and I would like to come and work with you. And he at that time had a completely different mindset. He was setting up a Indian company that was developing products and selling them all over instead of just providing software services. So that was a completely different business model. And I thought that would be a great thing to do. And I was given responsibility to do the investment banking sector. So the way they used to do it was very interesting. And I spent some time doing that with Rajesh over there. And then I got an opportunity to move to the US to work with a startup company in Silicon Valley with a couple of very, very interesting people. So I left CITL and said, I'm getting ready to go. But while I was waiting, I was waiting for my visa to get done. I at which point of time Pawan had left TCS and he'd gone to some couple of other companies and had taken over as president of the software division of IBM, which had now become Tata IBM. And he happened to see me in the building one day, and he called me aside and said, "I need you to come and work with me because I need somebody over here to do a certain number of jobs." And I was like, "No, I don't want to come back and work because I'm going to leave anytime." So he said, "All right, come as a consultant and work with me on this one project." And the project that he wanted me to do was to go all around India and train all the IBM managers on diversity. IBM had just started this, so I had to put together what the course was and fight with the managers to spend one day in a class with me, uh, exploring what their inherent biases were that they were bringing into recruitment and into other into their day-to-day operations with people. And Pawan felt that since I had so many first woman advantages in my career so far, I would be a good person to do it. Plus, I had always loved training. So from while I was doing that, there was a need to come to the US to bid for a AT&T big project that they were doing. So he asked me, would you be willing to go to the US to bid for this? And so I said, sure. And I went while I was there, I went to visit some of the people I knew who had just moved from IBM to the World Bank. And in the course of that, I was telling them, look, they were in the process of implementing SAP. So they told me that, we are implementing SAP. And I was trying to tell them that SAP was one of the products that my unit was handling the implementation of, and these are some of the pitfalls you have to watch out for. While this was going on, they said, well, would you like to come and work with us for a year? I was like, you must be crazy. I'm planning to go to Silicon Valley. I know nothing about the World Bank. Why would I want to join you? And I went back and I talked about this to Pawan, and I said, Pawan, this is what's happened. I didn't get any additional business from World Bank, but I got a job offer. And he told me, you're silly. Go and do this at World Bank. You'd be much better off than doing the startup. So that's how I came to the World Bank to work for a year. That year kind of got over in 9 months while they implemented SAP to replace 27 other systems that they had. This was year Y2K. So this was in 1998. And after that, I was asked to work as advisor to one of the CIOs of one of the IFC, which is one of the World Bank organizations. They wanted to set up quality, and they wanted to set up proper governance structures and all of the good things that you take for granted in any IT organization. I did that for a couple of years, and then I was acting as liaison to the internal audit function at the World Bank. And they approached me saying, we would like to have somebody who has IT experience, and you've done quality reviews and everything, so we would like you to come and join the audit department. So I thought, well, why not? So I took a third turn in my career from textile engineer to IT to management to internal audit on the ground doing audits. And it seemed like management consulting, internal management consulting to me, where you go in, you have to very quickly figure out what people are doing and then tell them what they're not doing correctly. So I got into internal audit, and then that opened up a completely different world to me in terms of what good governance should be, what, how you would manage risk of the organization achieving its objectives. So while I was working at the internal audit function, there was a lady called Carmen Lapointe, and she was the auditor general, and she taught me so much about external organizations, how the UN functions, how the standard setting bodies of governance, etc., function. And we had to find all sorts of ways in which we could get in resources because we were headcount strapped. And this lady had a vision to expand the internal audit function to cover much more than what was originally being covered. So my part of my job was to ensure that we have adequate resources and how we can get budgets extra, how we can, it's all a negotiation. So one of the things that we hit upon was we would invite people from the government audit functions in different countries to send their people to work with us for 3 to 6 months. Um, that gave us free free manpower, so to say. We just paid their existence, subsistence while they were here, living allowance and housing. And the people who came in got a really good exposure to working at the World Bank, and some of them stayed on in the World Bank, some of them left and went back uh, more enriched. So how you could manage with very limited resources was something that was really interesting for me to learn, of the various innovations that you can do in trying to get people on board. While I was at the internal audit function, my mother passed away. And so I wanted to go back to India to take care of my father. And in the meantime, Carmen had left and another lady had joined. And she was very nice enough to give me 2 years to go and stay in India. And while I was in India, I worked for a while in Bombay with a nonprofit called Cancer Patient Aid Association, which was founded by Mr. Y.K. Sapru and his wife, and another lady called Silu Jasdanwala. This organization has been functioning for the last 40 years when I joined them. And when I went there because another IIT classmate of mine, Shubha, was working in that organization. And she said, come, we really need somebody to help in our accounts area. And your audit, your finance, you can help in accounts. So I was sitting there and I would enter into their system, what checks they had issued and what checks needed to be issued. And there was a kind of a sense of awe of my colleagues about the fact that, Mai, you're from IIT, Mai, you're from the World Bank. And I would be like, I'm here as a volunteer, forget all of that. I'll do whatever is needed for me. And while I was doing that, Mr. Sapru one day approached me and said, we'd like you to work for us. So I said, okay, what job would you like me to work for? And he said, I don't have a job. I want you to go around, look at the organization and tell me where your passion lies. Are you passionate about helping people? Then you can go into the counseling side. Are you passionate about administration? Then you can do that. You pick what you want and write your job description and come and tell me. We need people in every area. And that was like a culture shock to me, coming from the corporate world where you say, show me your job description. Let me see if I can handle all the responsibilities. Do I have the necessary background? And in a sense, that was probably the best 2 years that I spent because I was able to help him put things in perspective from a sustainability and a governance perspective. And one of the questions I asked him was, you are now in your late 70s. Do you care what happens to this organization after you're gone? And his answer was, Susan ji, aaj tak kisi ne mujhe ye sawal nahi pucha. And I was like, if you plan to pass this on to somebody, you need to put certain things in place because right now all the decisions are being taken by you. And if something were to happen to you, who takes those? Nobody even knows what decisions need to be taken. So that also kind of opened up my eyes to the whole concept of governance and risk management and how we give so little credence to it because we all get stuck in this is what we are doing. How does an organization need to govern itself? How does an organization need to manage all the day-to-day operational risks and the other risks that are there in its existence? once my 2-year leave was over, I had to come back to the US, and I got an opportunity in a very strange way, because when I came back, um, what happened was my job had been made redundant. So I was told, okay, you can go and get yourself retrained. And so I was able to go to Harvard to do a management program over there. And that again, made me realize just how much was happening in the world around me. And I was able to help, um, not just myself, but when I came back, I went back into the World Bank, and I was working with the strategy and performance and budget division, helping them sort of cut down on the costs. And that was, again, great exposure. 2015, I decided I'd had enough of the World Bank, because I was more inclined to continue to help people. Uh, my personal mission in life is to help people and organizations be the best they can be. And so I decided to leave to take early retirement from the World Bank, and work with the Institute of Internal Auditors, doing consulting and auditing the auditors in different organizations, helping them sort of become the best they can be. So it's been a long journey. It's a journey that's continuing, and I have enjoyed every moment of it. And when I look back, I am happy, even though I really did not work in textiles for very long. I think the main thing I learned from IIT was how to learn. And that has, stood me in good stead throughout my career, and
Wow,
hopefully for the
Susan.
rest of my
Wow.
journey.
Wow. I wish I somebody asked me to go to Harvard for retraining, or if somebody told me to write my own job description. What a fabulous this thing, yeah, man. I didn't know all this actually. Even when I met you in Maryland a couple of years back, it was a very, very brief encounter. But it's been lovely to hear that. I want to go across
Thank you.
to I want to go across to Aditi. Aditi, put Susan on the spot.
Yeah, well, it's hard to put somebody who's had that kind of a journey on the spot, Pradeep. But I'm just blown away, Susan, by your journey, by listening to your story. And I mean, one thing that you said still holds true, a few decades later is IIT teaches you how to learn. I mean, that's
Mhm.
just true across the board. It's a timeless comment, and I have the same experience in my journey as well. So there is so much I want to ask you, Susan, but I think what I'm going to focus on, because not many of us have had, such a phenomenal journey, and we can claim that we were the first, to do so many things. So I want to ask you, Susan. So from being the first woman in textiles to being the first woman at TCS who was sent overseas, you've had so many firsts as a woman, and then to teach diversity, or give diversity training in IBM. What in your experience has been the evolution, right, being a woman in the corporate world? And I have to be thankful that we don't have experiences like that anymore, where they say we would have hired you if you were of a different gender. I'd be like, what? So anyway, so would love to hear your perspective, Susan, on the change that you've seen. We've had these types of conversations in a variety of forums, and we're moving in the right direction as a society, as corporations and so on. But what to you would be sort of the most or the biggest change you've seen since you started your journey to today in terms of being a woman in the workforce?
Um, Thank you, Aditya. That's a great question. So I'll just go back to a point of time when NASSCOM used to hold these large conferences, and I was running my startup, and I was in over there as a speaker at one of the NASSCOM conferences. And I think Infosys was just setting up its shop at that point of time. And I know Nandan Nilekani came up to me and said, well, you're here. This person is there. The third woman in IT is not present. So we are represented by 2/3 of the senior women in IT. sort of being singled out that there were 3 women. I mean, if you go back and look at IIT, we were the largest batch of women that ever joined IIT, I think. We were 12 of us in my batch. There were only 4 of us in engineering, but the rest had all come in for the 5-year MSc physics, chemistry, maths classes. And there were 12 of us there in a population. I would say at that point of time, the total population in IIT would have been 2,000 to 3,000 people. And there were about 40 or 50 of us women. So I sort of became very, and I'm sure you've experienced this, became very comfortable being in the company of men. And trying to hold my own over there was always a challenge. I remember there used to be times when Yogi Singh, my boss in IBM, would be having meetings and he would tell me, he said, Susan, please go out of the room. I need to curse. And I don't like people cursing. I don't curse myself. And I prefer that people express themselves differently rather than using curse words. And he knew that. So he would say, you need to leave the room. I need to talk to the guys like the guys. And I was like, too bad. Now you have me on your management team. I am not leaving the room. Use English. And from that point of time to now, you walk into a management meeting in any organization, and you find women are the leaders. You find women are, larger in number. However, the one place that you still find a lack of leadership is at the board levels, at the governance levels. And that to me is something, again, the perspective that women bring in, the perspective that we bring in more from a caregiver, from looking at things differently, because we are, our DNA itself is, we are engineered differently than men. So it's not that women are better or men are better. We just have a different perspective. And the more perspectives you get, the better is your end product, is my strong belief, which is the reason why I feel very strongly about, diversity and inclusion of all kinds of viewpoints in whatever we are doing.
Aditi, let's earmark Susan for our next InSquare USA. Topic.
I just made a note of that, Pradeep. I mean, some of the things that you talk about, Susan, are just so close to my heart and to many of us women who've had discussions like this, right? I mean, so you went from 12 women in the entire batch. So my batch had 12 women in the engineering program, the BTech program. And the curse word, I was the only person in my class in my engineering department. And I heard the same comment. I was like, wow, this is just a different setting. But, the boys who are, now men in my department, my class would be like, oh, we can't use a certain language or we can't behave a certain way because we have this girl in our class. So it's so amazing how some things don't change. But yes, Pradeep, I already have Susan down for our next InSquare session, and what an awesome conversation, Susan. Thank you for your perspectives.
Thank you.
Let's move on from San Francisco to Singapore. Yogesh, do you remember Susan at IBM? Were you there at that time?
Yes, I think that was still, and I do remember Susan, and she was part of Yogesh Singh's team. I was in a different area. I was, if you remember, I was at Gulipal.
Yes, I do.
But, it's very interesting that you talked about, very interesting journey that you had, both before IBM and after IBM. And you talked about being involved in AT&T. It was interesting because one of the milestone, turns for me in my career in IBM was when I started running the AT&T account for India. And it became a multi-billion account, so it was a very large account. And good to see that you were involved in that earlier. One of the questions that I had was, having had the experience in large global organizations like World Bank, I just want to understand from a governance perspective, are there some important lessons that you can pick from there that large commercial organizations can pick and, that they don't do today? Anything that you want to share comparing the two?
So when I look at large established organizations like the World Bank or any of the other organizations that are, Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies, everybody has a board. Uh, they have a board, and now, especially if you're in US and you're in a regulated industry, there's a lot of uh, focus that is being done on what is your role as a board member. Do you have the appropriate board members on here, or are these kind of just pat on the backs that you're giving to people that you know? So you are expected to have somebody who understands IT. You're expected to have somebody who understands finance. You're expected to have somebody who understands risk management and audit, because those are the areas that you're providing governance on behalf of the stakeholders to the organization. When I look at some of the, and to be honest with you, until I moved to the World Bank, I had never seen an internal audit function. None of the organizations that I worked for in India had an internal audit function. Um, uh, Even TCS, even to date, doesn't have an internal audit function. And I'm working with TCS, one group here in US, trying to help them set up what is known as an internal audit function, because they have a quality function which is extremely good. But the quality function is there for a different reason. It is there to help the client understand that we're doing things correctly. But how do you help your stakeholders get the feeling that everything is okay? If you look at the world, how management has managed different organizations, and you look at some of the big, uh, I would say, mishaps that have happened, it's a lot been because, okay, management knew something was going wrong, but let's try and cover up in the good faith that it will become okay next quarter or next year. And there was nobody saying, no, we need to see this a little more in detail. And that's the function that the board has to play. The board has to be there to help guide, direct, and advise the organization if they are going astray. And I think when we look at some of the small and medium businesses, they feel this is an overhead. I don't want somebody telling me how to run my business. And that's the fallacy. I keep, when I today, as part of the consulting that I do, I talk to board members, I talk to CEOs, presidents of organizations. My thing to them is, look at your board as your advisory committee, not as somebody who's directing you, but somebody whom you can go to ask for advice. Being a CEO is a very lonely position, and I'm sure most of you know that. You have people who work for you who would be giving you advice for sure, but how about getting advice from somebody who is independent and who has the interest in the organization at heart? And again, it's a different perspective from where they sit, rather than from somebody who's in sales or marketing or HR, who's trying to give you advice as to how you should, as a CEO, should be functioning. So in my thinking, boards are extremely important, and I think organizations need to look at it. The internal audit function usually is a extra set of independent eyes that reports into the boards rather than reporting into management, who are supposed to be sort of uh, making sure that everybody is doing what they should be doing and doing it effectively and efficiently. I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. I think for example, in Singapore, there's a big news about the company called Zillingo, which has just fired the CEO.
Absolutely, the female. I remember that. It's
yeah,
making a lot of news.
Ankita, both. Yeah. And you keep wondering, they had these board members whose job was to keep a check and point out things in time and why it didn't happen. So I think even when people have board members, it is very important that they do their role properly and they have the teeth to kind of call it out. So I think it's a very important area. Thanks for that. Yeah.
So Yogesh, I have a lot more questions that I would like to ask you. Both you and I have been with IBM, But I would like to pick up on your experience on building up of the IBM delivery center, which at one point in time had 140,000 people. So I'll invite you to come in as a speaker in one of the future sessions, because I think that's a very interesting story by itself, as well as how the Singapore GIC was set up and all that kind of a thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Now I want to move across to Raghu. From Singapore, we go to Montreal. And are you going to be speaking in French or English, Raghu?
My daughter speaks in French, I speak in English. That's how we communicate.
So over to you for giving your perspectives, asking questions to Susan.
I think, Susan, what really resonates is how the move to internal audit was kind of a fillip to your career and experience. And it really resonates because it happened the same to me. GE has an internal audit function. It was called the corporate audit staff. And after 4 years, I started after IIT with research and development. And then I flipped to joining the internal audit program. And
Wow.
There were two things that they did, which was very interesting to me, which was you're primarily doing financial audits and business improvement. And 80% of the people were CAs and CPAs from finance. But I think in audit, what you miss is having the understanding of the process and the business context.
Absolutely.
And those are the areas where people from non-finance or engineering or operations could come in and add a lot of value. So we were encouraged to apply to the program. And to the point really that IIT teaches you how to lead, I had to go from not knowing anything about debits and credits or P&L or balance sheet and learn accounting on the job. But IIT is so good that way that, I was a chemical engineer. You realize that if you can understand thermodynamics in IIT, you can understand anything. So I went in a year with not knowing anything to become like the cycle trainer for derivatives accounting, taxes, foreign exchange, because I think we just programmed to pick up things very quickly and apply it. So that I think was very good for my career and very good, I think, in the way how they structure the internal audit to have a mix of people from different backgrounds. And the second thing they did was, internal audit is sometimes, so that it's not very glamorous, right? But it is a very important governance piece of the business. So how do you make it attractive to get the best people? So what they did was they made it like a leadership development program. So since G was all around the world, you basically lived out of a suitcase for a few years. You would travel on audits 4 months or every 2 months or every 4 months. You would see a different business. There were different industrial business in a different cycle, a money lending business, an entertainment business. And you got that entire broad leadership exposure. So during that time, I remember the first audit, I was sent to Korea working on a business where my client and my CFO spoke Korean only. I couldn't eat with a chopstick. That was another big thing. They only ate beef, and I was a vegetarian. So, at the end of all of those experiences, I lived for in 6 countries, those 2 to 3 years, you come up with a confidence that you can survive anything. And that was, to me, the best thing I did in my career. So I think that story of how the vitality of internal audit from an organization and from a career standpoint really resonates.
So thank you very much, Raghu. And Susan, we've got a lot more things to discuss, but in the interest of time, we've actually gone 15 minutes over time because it was so fascinating. And I would be inviting you over to come as part of the leaders panel in one of the future sessions. It will be
Sure.
great.
Thank you.
It will be great to have you. So with that, please give a big round of applause to Susan, as well as to Aditi, Yogesh, and Raghu for their perspectives and questions. And we now move on to somebody who is been in the engine room for the Aditya Birla Group. Mr. Pankaj Rai, where are you?
Here I am.
Pankaj, tell me, are you a data analytics expert? Guru? Is that what you've been doing all your life?
Thanks, Pradeep. First of all, I was actually thinking about, going after Susan. What can I say that, I'm the first man to do something? And I could come up with, I could come up with two things, which none of those two I could claim credit for. First of all, I was the firstborn to my parents, so I was first over there. Frankly, didn't contribute to that. The second one was that I was born on the day when the first man landed on the moon, 25th July 1969, Neil Armstrong. So, so unfortunately, couldn't come up with anything better than that, but I did try, Susan. So yeah, I think my life story is. I actually look at it in a generational sense. My grandfather was a farmer. My father worked as an engineer, and I kind of worked mostly in services. So it's interesting, I can't remember my hunter-gatherer forefathers, but all the other, phases of human evolution seem to be represented in my three generation that I can see, and I'm waiting for my daughters are going to do. So my story began with them. Actually, my dad used to be in a very remote village, and you movies that you see, the Super 30 types. He ended up in IIT Bombay knowing only Bhojpuri, and again one of those fighter types who went on to then, of course, got a scholarship. But parents said, "गांव से Bombay चले गए बहुत है. Please work for a government company," because that is what was considered to be a safe job. So he took up a job in Fertilizer Corporation, a public sector in Gorakhpur, which is where I grew up initially. And given that such people are fighters, he went down to become the MD of the company, and then served as the chairman for two other companies, Crypto and FACT, and retired. But I think the motivation that he had was that his two sons should be engineers. So me and my younger brother were packed off to IIT Delhi. So I give all the credit to going to IIT to my dad, because he would come back from office, make sure we were taught maths and science. And the question always was asked, एक नंबर मैथ्स में क्यों कटा तुम्हारा? तुम्हारे बाप का तो कभी एक भी नहीं कटा था, तुम्हारा 99 कैसे आ गया? So that is the kind of upbringing we had from an early childhood. So I don't think me and my brother had any other options but to land up in IIT. So again, I don't think I can claim much credit to get there. The other interesting factoid there is this, that in his IIT Bombay class, he had folks from Delhi modern school who used to speak very good English. And he had this inferiority complex that he can't speak English. So when we were in Delhi, I was admitted to modern school. And people always ask me that, if your dad wanted you to go to IIT, I mean, is that the only school he could think of? He could have chosen DPS at least. But anyway, so I studied in modern and went to IIT. And clearly after that, I realized that I had no interest in electrical engineering. Neither could I work with the larger machine where I would blow up in the practicals. And the smaller ones, the electrons and protons, I could imagine, and I could never comprehend what they were. So both sides of electrical engineering, the large and the small ones, I just don't relate to. So what does a bad engineer do? Try to escape and do an MBA. And that's what I did. I went to Ahmedabad and became an MBA. Not that I enjoyed it. As I always say that in our generation, and I think Swapnil can probably relate to his parents, most decisions were taken based on elimination and the limited choices that were available versus based on passion, which seems to be the order of the day today because the choices are so limited. So after the MBA, there was no option but to take up a job. So the first job that came my way was a company called Feedback Ventures, which was a consulting company set up by some IMA seniors. And I worked there for a while. Quite a good experience working in a startup, I would say. At that time, that term wasn't very well known. But after a while, I realized that I don't think I know anything much to advise CEOs on what they should do, which is what I used to do. And then a friend of mine who was in ICICI at that point in time said, this money lending business is pretty cool. You give money to people, they entertain you, they teach you their business, and then you lend them money and things like that. So I said, yeah, that sounds good. Lending money or giving money is always, I think, it seemed like a noble thought. So I went to ICICI, and I do think that ICICI in those days, when it was a financial institution, was a great place. We were, going to various factories and various places, meeting founders and promoters and CFOs and marketing heads and giving them money because it was a large financial institution. And if you were setting up a project in those days in India, it was impossible that you did not go to ICICI, IDBI, and ICICI. One of these three, or all of them were usually involved. So great experience. And then when I was, getting married, some of my friends said that, you have to, at some stage, stop learning and start earning. And some of my friends had gone to Citibank, some had gone to Peregrine in Hong Kong, some had gone to GE Capital, and I was relating to Raghu, my GE experience. So I went to GE Capital at that time in Gurgaon. And great experience, not that I stopped learning. I think GE exposed me to a much bigger world beyond financial services that I was used to. While I was in the capital business, I think the whole focus on Six Sigma, leadership, that whole global operation, how, CFOs through cash, which Raghu was, used to become CEOs. And I remember Keith Shedden still, who was 39 when he became this CFO of the company and so forth. So I think G was a great place. It's unfortunate that the company had a downfall recently, and we have a ex-G group, and we keep talking about our experiences at G. So G was great. And then G, allowed me to now explore other ideas beyond finance and banking, because, finance banking people typically don't leave. Most of my friends today are still those bankers who were in ICICI and then went to Goldman Sachs and many other places. So G was into this whole offshoring activity, which became Jekis and Genpact later on. But there was a gentleman called Romi Malhotra, who was actually, someone introduced me to him, and he had gone to set up Standard Chartered Bank's operations in Chennai. That was back in 2003. So I was persuaded to take up that as the next career option. That is a growing industry. Lots of global companies are doing back office in India. That will be nice. So I went there, and then went to Singapore because they were setting up a center in Kuala Lumpur, Stanchart. So I spent some time there. And then Romi came to Bangalore to set up an operation for Dell. So 2005, I came to Bangalore. So most of my early life was in Delhi. And then 2005 onward, last 17 years, actually, I've been in the same apartment complex, paying rent initially, and then bought the same place. So very, very stable. And when people ask me, where are you from? I said, you should ask me where I'm going, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm in Puramangala, third block, Bangalore, Embassy Triangle. That's the place I will be, I think, forever now, having been 17 years in one place. So Dell, 11 years, happened chance. Someone said, we want to set up a data analytics team, and would you like to do it? And, analytics always sounds interesting to engineers. And I said, yeah, why not? And I ended up doing that and got into doing that for 8-9 years. And then a few friends had gone to Wells Fargo, who had set up their operations there, and they said they are growing and they want to set up some digital and strategy capabilities. So I was hired there and went over there. And then more recently, another old friend of mine who was in the Aditya Birla group, who had set up this data analytics team, was going back to the US because his daughter got a college admission there, and he said, I'm going back to the US, so why don't you take up my job? So my career journey, Pradeep, has been all initially propelled by my dad, and later on pulled by my friends. So I've had no, personal views on what the career should look like. In fact, I used to dread the question, which was very often asked in those days: where do you see yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I said, wow, I have no idea. I don't even know how I came here.
I love it, Pankaj. I love it, Pankaj. You seem to be just kind of reinventing yourself every couple of years, and just like what Susan has been doing. Now, tell me, in your current role, you are a part of a group which is reporting to Aditya Birla. How does it feel? Do you kind of suddenly feel the pressure of working in the engine? How big is the Aditya Birla Group in terms of revenue or sales? What kind of numbers are there?
Yeah, so I think we kind of look at ourselves as a conglomerate within India, and I think the larger ones in India, as you know, are the Tatas and the Reliance, and now Adani as well. So from a market cap perspective, which is what people tend to value more these days, I mean, the Tatas are close to $300 billion, and Aditya Birla is about 70, 75. So much smaller compared to the others. But fairly well diversified across industrial, finance, and fashion. So there are enough consumer businesses and industrial businesses and a trading company. So I think the way the group is organized, and it's quite interesting. I didn't know this, and I don't know how many other groups globally are organized that way. That while there are a lot of group companies, several of them private companies actually, who we work with. Many are public, which people know of, which is into cement and aluminum and all that. But there is trading company, there is a carbon company, and there are a few other private companies that most people don't know. So that comprises the group, and the common thread really is that the chairman Kumar Mangalam Birla owns a majority stake in all of those companies. So that's how he becomes the group chairman. But what he has done long ago, and I believe when he came into this job 25 years ago, because of his father's early death, he was barely 26, and I think Dr. Ramcharan was his advisor, who also happened to be the advisor to Jack Welch and several others. So a lot of progressive ideas were put in place very long ago. But given that a lot of senior leaders were there, it took a long while for them to take shape. So the structure is a central company called Aditya Birla Management Corporation Private Limited, which is a internal think tank, which I think is a huge investment. And the job of that think tank is really to help all group companies, small or large, get better in some of those capabilities. So the various internal functions, I mean, I of course represent the data science function, but there is IT, sustainability, innovation, audit, M&A, consumer insights, and several others. So the investment in various central functions by hiring a lot of senior leaders, experienced leaders from the industry, and letting them loose on the rest of the group companies to say, you have to help these guys bring in some of these capabilities into the group. So I think that's a big investment that I've seen. I've seen central group functions as either coordinating or governing or directing, but in innovation type or investment type approach, I haven't seen. So to that extent, at some level, there's a lot of pressure because you have to do something which hasn't been done before. At another level, there's no day-to-day pressure. No one is going to check with you, what did you do this week? So the idea is, how do you transform the group? And this is true for all these corporate functions. So it's quite exciting, at least from my perspective, who likes to, Pradeep, like you said, reinvent things. And I'm really very, very new. I'm just 9, 10 months old. So I'm still not, very deep into the trenches. But I think that the opportunity to transform, working with my many other colleagues together, is the opportunity I see, and which is the reason I'm here.
But end of the day, Pankaj, you see, even though you are representing Aditya Birla and you are in the engine room, but whatever framework you come out with, end of the day, implementation of that is with the individual companies. So how do you manage that balance?
Yeah. So I think, interestingly, the group, has a very, very federated entrepreneurial culture, which I think is a great strength, where every group company, every CEO has a lot of leeway in how they run their business, because that's how they create the entrepreneurial spirit. So I think the group function like ours have to do a lot of influencing and change management. So I think the team that I represent, we have created our own internal 4P framework, which I think can be applied to any other group function. In fact, I have to say that a lot of these learnings came from GE. I was a Six Sigma guy over there, and Raghu would recollect. It wasn't easy to implement Six Sigma, and much, much more difficult in a capital function where people felt that if I'm a GE capital guy, I mean, these manufacturing type things don't apply to us, and I was made the Six Sigma leader for that function. So I think the influencing framework that we have tried here is what the project platform, people and partnership. So our approach is that, first of all, you do a project using your capability, which is data science, and show something to them, whether it is in marketing or logistics or energy or supply chain, and say, hey, this works. And they said, okay, wow, this is cool. The platform is really distilling that knowledge into a sort of an automated code, which can work as a platform. If you were a strategy team, the platform for you would be strategy frameworks or some approaches and so forth. So basically, you are, distilling whatever you are doing as a project into some sort of thing that someone can utilize. And the people side is really training and equipping the people inside for them to be able to pick it up themselves versus rely on an outsider. And the fourth piece, the partnership, is that you do all of those things with external partners. So we partner a lot with startups and with big tech and industrial tech companies like ABB Digital, G Digital, and so forth, and several other companies. So that is the approach, Pradeep, that whole influencing, utilizing, doing POCs, automating them, training their people, exporting our talent into them, helping them drive talent, creating processes and so forth, to slowly, infuse these capabilities into those businesses. So it's a long process. I've just begun. And I think right now, me and some of my colleagues are trying to do a more top-down immersion for senior leaders, for them to believe, what is this whole digital and analytics all about.
So now moving on to a different tack, you seem to be, doing a whole lot of stuff. You are very much promoting inclusion. You also want to, bring about some kind of a career guidance framework for kids or people who, for their careers and all that. Now, what made you go on for inclusion?
Yeah. So I think many of these things, Pradeep, came to me because someone said, why don't you talk about it? Why don't you share your thoughts about it? And when I did that, I felt, hey, I could share that with others and not the individual who asked me. So clearly the diversity and inclusion part, being in some of these large organizations, there's always a Women's Day and they will want to have a man's perspective. And I never wanted to, read up stuff and say, what is there out there. I said, okay, what's my own experience on diversity and inclusion? And I said, when I started off, we were like, my mom was the only woman in the family, and we were three men, so we had less 25% diversity. And today, I have two daughters, my wife, and a bunch of maids. I think I'm a minority over there. So I've seen that sort of evolution in my own family under this roof. So based on that, I created, some points of view, and I can go into that if you like. The health and fitness part came into because I started enjoying running and marathons and so forth, and I had done a couple of races in IIT. I wasn't a runner, but here in Bangalore, lovely weather, got with some other folks and started marathon running. And then people said, "You are like so old and you started running, and how does it feel?" And I said, Milkha Singh started at 65, I started at 35, so I wasn't so old. So anyway, so the health and fitness theme came into being, and my daughter's college asked me to do a TED talk, so I thought of some framework and shared that there. The career part came into being 5-6 years ago when my daughter was going to college, and my wife said, tell her what she should do. And I said, okay, let me try to reflect on my own experiences, and again came up with some sort of framework. So I think networking was the other one, when someone said, why don't you teach? So I guess, people have asked me to give a talk or share my thoughts, and I thought about it and came up with something, and then with subsequently they have been refined. So that's how some of these ideas have come into being today.
And for everybody's info, Pankaj has some very popular YouTubes. He's got his own channel, and he spends a lot of time, and I really appreciate that. With that, over to you, Aditi.
Yeah, again, just like Susan, it's been such a fascinating journey, Pankaj. And I mean, there are topics that I could probably spend hours just asking you questions about. And one thing that I will say upfront, I did go to DPS, Pankaj, and I can relate to the modern and DPS comment. So I just wanted to let you know. And one thing that you mentioned, and kind of relates to the career framework topic you were talking about. I'm a mom of high schooler who's getting ready to talk about college, and I just see it's fascinating how the difference between how we you mentioned that your career decisions were largely influenced by your parents or your friends later on. And I mean, it's amazing to see the evolution. Like, I mean, with my son, it's all about passion, and that's what like kids these days, they want to do things because they want to do them, not because it's good for them for career. In fact, if I tell him, oh, hey, this will be good for your college application, he just shuts that down. He's like, I'm not doing anything to get into a college. I'm doing it because I want to do it or I like it. So I will be subscribing to your channels about, the career framework and all of that. Just for my sense. So, but I do want to dive a little bit into the data science piece, right? Because you have so much wealth of knowledge and experience there. Obviously with deep learning and with especially in the B2C space, we see a lot of data being really everything these days, right? It's so priceless, and so much depends on data. It has so much gravity. In the B2B space, Pankaj, like what is the next big thing in data science? Like, I mean, where do you think the we're headed with data?
Yeah, thanks, Aditi. So, I always utilize my, again, G knowledge of Six Sigma to say, when the world was linear, continuous incremental improvement, which Six Sigma taught us, was great. But when the world is continuously reinventing in multiple dimensions, then what you need is really continuous transformation. And continuous improvement is not good enough, which is what I think companies around us are doing, and individuals have to do as well. So in the industrial world, the transformation really is about, machines. And our machines have been manufactured long ago, and data wasn't necessarily something that people were thinking about when they were making machines. There was an OEM who will make a machine, give you the parameters, and it is supposed to perform. And in the shop floor, people will tinker around and do certain things. But now, with all these digital coming into being, the OEM themselves, whether you take Schneider or GE or ABB or anyone else, they've all developed their own digital practices. So those machines have an overlay of a historian which will capture data. There are other companies that bring that software in one place and all of that. So I think a lot of data on the machines, Internet of Things, you can put sensors, is now available. And therefore, basically you solve the same problem that you always solve. So I think there are no new problems. So in my project platform framework, the platform that we are building on the machine side is really related to ESG. Sustainability is a big one. In making aluminum, a lot of energy is spent. So how do you optimize energy in a aluminum smelter? How do you optimize logistics in a cement business, which is very local and very sensitive to transport cost? What do you do in the carbon business, which is very global in nature, and so on and so forth. So I think, Aditya, I think the data just enables us to solve some of those problems, which were probably not easy to solve when some of this data was not available. So I keep, actually these days, this morning someone was asking me about data science. I said, today a lot of effort I spend is in telling people why and when not to use data. Because these days, since data is so much available everywhere, there is a tendency to utilize it. And I say, let's first figure out what do we need to do. Let's just focus on that, the 5 why or whatever. Then figure out, is it even ethical and beneficial for the society to do it? Now let's look at data. And sometimes many of the things will not pass the first two tests, because half the time, I would say, and at least in my own experience, people are just solving the wrong problems at a much lower level or at a much different level and so forth. And my kind of sort of message to my data scientists is that, anything that can be defined will be automated. That's what engineers are for. If you can define something, someone will write an algorithm, write it. So I would say that I can tell Alexa to write code tomorrow. So don't imagine that your skill set and your advantage is in writing code. Your skill set will be in defining the problem. My favorite example to them is that my question paper in an exam would be, tell me in a maths question paper, which are the 5 questions that you think math should be solving? And now solve it for me. And if you don't find the right 5 questions, I won't give you any marks. I don't think we have been teaching folks on what is worth doing. We have been just, teaching people on the solutioning space. In my mind, solutioning is already commoditized and will get commoditized. The questioning space is where the value is, and I don't think we're spending too much time over there. So maybe a slightly digression from the question that you asked, Aditi.
No, it's spot on, Pankaj, because it is so important to understand which problems to solve rather than, trying to always find a different solution. And I mean, data is at the heart of all of it. So I love that perspective. And I love how you said it's so important to know what's worth solving, right? So really appreciate it. Thanks, Pankaj.
No, I agree with you. At the end of the day, you see, we have to use data for solving business problems. So we sometimes lose sight of the perspective and we get lost in the data side of it so much. So thank you very much, Aditi. Now over to you, Yogesh.
And thanks, Pradeep. Really interesting to learn about your life journey. I do remember the day you were born, because I was old enough. I was old enough to hear the moon landing on the radio. So, and I think we had very similar journeys in the sense that Delhi, born in Delhi, brought up in Delhi, went to IIT. Of course, I went to IIT Kanpur, and then later on moved to Bangalore, and I did move to Koromangala in Verghese residency. So we might actually be neighbors.
We should meet.
And of course, yeah. And then I moved to Singapore later on. So very interesting. One of the areas that I'm always very curious about is the culture of the organization. And every group in India has a different culture. Tatas have a culture, and Reliance has a culture, and so on. Any key attributes of the Birla culture that you can talk about, which kind of distinguishes it, and which has made it survive for so long, and shown the growth?
Yeah, and I think I can answer that in a few different ways. One is, and this is still not, being shared outside, but the group senior leaders and many others came together to define a group purpose. So we did not have a group purpose. Individual companies had their purpose or vision or mission, but that never was the case. And I think the group has become too large and new businesses are being launched. So the need was felt apparently pre-pandemic before I joined, and they had done surveys with vendors, customers, employees, all that. But when I joined, they were doing engaged the entire leadership group of 120 top leaders, and we spent several, sessions together. And the group purpose, which, I first say what it came about. And right now they're saying we'll just keep it internally. We'll just want to make sure that all of us are able to appreciate, instill, live it, and then we want to communicate outside to our stakeholders, because unless we are all able to represent that purpose, which is pretty fascinating. Usually a company will say, okay, now we got a purpose, let's go do a media blitz, let's tell everyone all of that. They say, no, just figured it out. I don't think we still know how it should manifest itself. So a lot of effort is going on, and just making everyone understand what it is, and translate that into behavior and so forth. So the next 18 months, that will be that. But the purpose really is enrich lives by building responsible and dynamic institutions and businesses that inspire trust. So the fact that I can, relate the purpose without referring to a slide tells you something, because I don't think I could relate to many of those purposes and vision statements in other companies because they looked all the same. So I think so that is one. And this purpose video was launched by our chairman in the home of Gandhi. I think Mr. And Gandhi used to live in one of the Birla homes. So I think there's a video where he's walking there in a khadi, and so basically relating it to nation building. So I think there's a lot of ethos related to nation building, and I think it is also relevant today when every country is trying to develop their own internal capability. We also have our own Atmanirbhar initiative, but I guess the world over, there's a bit of a resurgence of nationalism and nation building, because I think globalization somewhere has developed some cracks and people are building that. So that's one way of looking at it. The second is fair amount of authority and accountability to everyone. I haven't seen some people sometimes argue that no one gets fired here, and that's another you can look at it as a good thing or a bad thing. But people have just been here, but a lot of strong focus on people development. So there's a gentleman called Dr. Santok Mishra, who's been with the company for 25 odd years as the head of HR and now also the head of Birla Carbon Business, and he's been responsible, and his team has been responsible for putting in some excellent HR process. And I worked in many of these global companies, and I think that the processes over here are a culmination of many of those, and continues to refine over time. I think the difference that I see in a conglomerate and maybe a founder-led company is that there is continuity at the top. So the last 25 years, it's just a few people at the top taking decisions. So, continuous improvement, continuous refinement. While in many multinationals, at times, leadership changes, new people come up with different ideas, and they do impact the culture in some way, not right or wrong. So I think there's a continuity and refinement of a certain way of doing things, which can also lead to some hubris and some problems there which need to be fixed. So that's that. I think himself, Mr. Birla, who the chairman, is known to be extremely humble, extremely people friendly, and people who interact with him, even the junior most employee, will come back thinking that he really cares about him. So I think it's a pretty strong people oriented, development oriented culture over here. But at the heart of it, it's an entrepreneurial group. So it wasn't apparent to me when I joined, but every industry that liberalized in India, the Birla Group actually made a foray into it and did not succeed in many of them. So telecom, it is in a mess right now, but that was their payment bank. They set it up, then they closed it down. More a retail companies was set up, closed down. Transworks, a BPO company, set up, closed down. So pretty much, insurance, we have it. So every sector that ever opened up, the Birla Group, has been there. And I didn't necessarily think of the group as a very entrepreneurial company because, from the outside, they just don't talk. They just don't talk about anything. So I had no knowledge. I just joined because Deep Thomas, who was my predecessor, said, "Tu aaja yaar, ye achhi company mein bata raha hu." So I have joined companies and taken job based on that and not do too much research beyond what my friends told me. And I was pleasantly surprised to find many of my IT friends also who I had lost touch. By the way, one of them in the textile engineering department, I found him in Thailand. He was working for Thai acrylic fibers, and I said, "Oh, you have been here." All of us MBAs sometimes lose touch with our engineering friends. A few of them who remained in engineering. And there are many other, people from various global companies that have been hired. In fact, Mr. Satish Pai, who heads Hindalco, he was 28 years, a Schlumberger, IIT Madras guy, last 10 years CEO. So many leaders from global companies are here. So I think the group has a lot of good, senior talent, which is not it wasn't at least obvious to know or visible to me. So I have been very pleasantly surprised with the culture, the talent, and the approach and the long-term thinking. And I'm now, quote unquote, selling Indian groups to a lot of my MNC friends who still have the same notion that I had, that Indian companies are no good and better work for the multinational companies and so forth.
Thank you, Yogesh. Raghu, over to you.
Fascinating journey, Pankaj. Again, there were so many images popping into mind as you spoke about your career journey. I spent many years in Kormangla. I went to DPS, of course, GE. So it was fantastic to hear. As Pradeep introduced, I spent quite a few years as a CFO, and then I was moved to be the business transformation leader for renewable energy, where I'm running digital transformation. One of the things I saw in an industrial conglomerate, particularly now what GE is digital transformation, they say 90% of digital transformations fail because there's an obsession on tools. And one of the things that I see as I'm coming to 2.5 years of the digital transformation journey is you're only spending kind of 10% of the time on really tools. You're spending 90% of the time, at least in my experience, in change management because roles and responsibilities are changing, processes are changing, um, how teams should use data versus say going to finance to get data. They can access the data themselves. How they should access the data, especially in a culture where for some people, being in the industry for 40 years, even Excel is high tech. So almost 90% of the time has been around the usability, the user, and the change management versus tools and systems and data, which you will figure out, but it doesn't. It's kind of well structured. Is that been your initial experience there as well? That we get excited because digital is sexy, but it's really the hardcore nuts and bolts of process and change management that takes the most of your time and effort.
Absolutely, Yogesh. I think all of us who work in G and many other places where we have driven change, I think it sort of comes naturally to us, but it doesn't seem to come naturally to many other organizations. So here, the way I'm kind of positioning, and we are calling it digital transformation like everyone else, linking it to the purpose. And I said, if you have to be responsible, dynamic, and trustworthy, which are the three words in the purpose statement, then digital is the answer. And the definition of digital that I have adopted for ourselves is to say, it's a mindset first, and then which utilizes some of those tools too. So it's a growth mindset of continuous experimentation, continuous evolution, and so forth. And it happens to be that lots of tools are available to make it happen. So even in the past, you could have had a growth mindset, but all these exponential technologies which can converge together and allow you to do lots of experiments is available now. So I think that is the difference that I'm bringing out to people to say that this mindset can now be given legs based on the technologies available. So don't put the cart before the horse and start to learn technology. Because I was, keep being getting asked to give a talk on that, and I said, and everyone will say, "कौन सा tool पढूं, कौन सा course करूं?" मैंने कहा कुछ मत पढ़ो. So we have actually adopted a framework. It's a Gartner framework of digital, where we're saying at the three layers. At the top is there's a strategy, and we say, let's translate that strategy into a digital strategy. Whether what can digital do to your strategy? It can be optimization, enablement, transformation, whatever. So let's define the roadmap. At the bottom, you have tools and technology, but the middle layer is the operating model, which is really your talent, your decision rights, your governance, your funding, all of that. And those things are very hidden in any organization. And how do you do that? So what kind of org structure should you look at? So my CDO in one of the companies, I'm telling him that you should hire 5 or 6 digital heads, align them to each company, each function, which is logistics, marketing, all of that. And they should be the successor to the logistics head and the marketing head. That's the best way to bring a digital DNA in the company. They are the talent who go in there. They first act, just like our Six Sigma people were enablers and then they became process owners. So can we do the same for digital? So that's just one idea. So I think the idea is to do more of a mindset change. And one of the mindset change could be through just inducting that type of talent into the organization, which is what I'm trying to put in place. And the tools and techniques and the trainings are all there. But I think the mindset of the senior leader that what would my successor look like? What would my next level successor look like? Engaging them in those discussions and helping them think about the future of the business 5-10 years from now. So yeah, it's a difficult long journey in a diversified business, especially which is very successful. So just like G, the thinking here is that you have to be number 1, 2, or 3 in business. It's very hard for a market leader to imagine that they need to change. So that is another interesting thing.
Absolutely fabulous, Pankaj. It's been a great session, and I'll be inviting you over for a later session as part of the leaders panel. As well as, so a big round of applause for Pankaj, as well as for Aditi, Yogesh, and Raghu. And Raghu, I will be inviting you to speak at one of the forthcoming GCC sessions. Lovely. And from Pankaj, we move on to somebody who called me uncle couple of weeks back, and I was looking over my shoulder to see who is he addressing to. But jokes apart, a big welcome to Swapnil. This
Thank you so
guy,
much.
even though he is the youngest of a lot, he's been doing some phenomenal things. He was at Columbia and trying to help them launch their executive education online. He was an entrepreneur. He's now trying to build the Netflix of executive education. So over to you, Swapnil. What has been your journey post IIT Delhi?
Right. Thank you so much. Firstly, I'm in pretty illustrious company, so I'm just happy to be here and share my story. So it's been an interesting one, and I don't think I planned any of it. It all happened at every stage of life where it was more about making interesting life decisions, and the work was a part of it, because you have to work, and you basically want to do something interesting. So my first job was at Goldman Sachs, which was a plan, because I was like, I want to make a lot of money to travel the world. Where do you make a lot of money to travel the world? You go to a big bank and you do that, right? So I was like, fine, so let's go to Goldman Sachs. And then 1.5 years, 2 years later, I realized that I was only making the rich people richer. And I was like, what am I doing here? And I want to do something interesting and more fun. And wasn't fun for mom and dad, because I got up and left the job, which is unusual for them. Like, Swapnil, so what are you going to do, Swapnil? I'm like, I'll figure it out. Let me see. So I started my own company in self-publishing. It was called Serene Woods, and it was more of a creative venture, because I love writing myself, and I thought the publishing industry was heavily skewed, where like a fraction of the books come out, and the publishing house itself judges the book to say whether it's going to make them millions of dollars or not, right? But a lot of authors who are good never get read, maybe because they're not as commercially, viable as some of the other stuff. So I opened this company called Serene Woods around self-publishing. I think it was slightly ahead of its time, but nevertheless, I had a lot of fun. I did that for about a couple of years, and we published about 50, 60 books. There were books by kids. There was a book by a 12-year-old, and the sheer joy of seeing her work published in a book was quite phenomenal. And then there was also, books by management thinkers and other people. So it gave a lot of, appeal to first-time authors, and that's what we wanted to promote. But I did realize that publishing is a very difficult business from a commercial viability point of view, and the commercial model is heavily skewed towards retailers and stuff, and it's not really sustainable. So I was like, okay, what do I do next? And I had gone on a student exchange from IIT to France, and I had absolutely loved Europe. So I was like, okay, I think Europe will be fun to do, go to, right? And I was like, so how do you get to Europe the easiest way? And sitting in India, I think it was really hard to find a work visa, work job to do it. So I was like, okay, why don't I do an MBA at INSEAD? It was only 1 year. And I was like, okay, that'll be fun to just spend a year in Europe, and maybe I can find a job after that and do that, right? So I went to INSEAD. This was almost about 10 years ago. In fact, this weekend's my 10-year reunion, but I couldn't make it. After INSEAD, I was trying to figure out a job I wanted to do. And I happened to meet a professor from Columbia, Professor Hitendra Wadhwa, and he was setting up a company in online learning. And I knew very little about online learning. And at that time, online learning was, literally coming up very new. I mean, people have dabbled with online learning, decades ago, but the latest form of online learning that we see with Coursera, Udacity, and other forms of executive education really started in 2011. And he was setting up something there in collaboration with Columbia. And he was like, you want to come and help me set up my business? And I love setting up businesses. I think the one theme that I have had throughout my career is about setting up new stuff. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And I think the other interesting part about the job was he had incorporated the lives of a lot of great leaders in his work. And I was like, okay, it'll be a nice opportunity to read these stories of, the lives of great leaders, right? So I was like, fine, it'll be interesting to do it. It'll be interesting to set up the business. And I did that for 3 years. And in 2015, I was in touch with my dean at INSEAD, and they were actually launching the online business at that time. And he just was like, Swapnil, do you want to come and help us set up the online business at INSEAD? And I was like, I wasn't sure how it's going to be, but I was like, I get a paid holiday in Europe. So worst come worst, I'll work for like a year or two. Doesn't work out, I'll come back. So I was like, let's go to Europe and let's do this job. And I've been at INSEAD now for almost 7 years. when I did my MBA at INSEAD, I never thought I'll actually go back to work there, but yeah, I've been there for 7 years. So I spent about a couple of years in France, 2015, 2016, then I moved to Singapore in 2017. So spent about five, 6 years setting up the online learning business. I led that for like 2-3 years, and I was itching to do something more because the business was fairly stable. And we last October we set up a learning innovation unit formally. So for the longest time, we've always done innovation in an ad hoc fashion, and I don't think that's ever a good idea. I think you need to always think of innovation in a very structured way and approach it and try to get ahead of the world rather than playing catch up. And the world is moving pretty fast, right? So we were like, why don't we set up something which looks at innovation in a very structured way? And as part of that, I'm building a Netflix of learning mobile app. Actually, it'll go live in about 3-4 weeks. So it's been very exciting. A lot of people talk about Netflix of learning, and there are various definitions flying around, and we don't know if ours is going to be the right one or not, but basically it's literally a mobile app which kind of looks like Netflix, but you find bite-sized content there. You can engage with your community, and I remember when we were talking, you mentioned that it's kind of like building a community around lifelong learning, and I think that's exactly what it is. And Mr. I talked about, continuous evolution, continuous stuff. There's also, I think, continuous learning is very important. And people think that most people that I've come across, at least in my work, executives, HR, L&D, they think continuous learning is about just offering 1 or 2, 3 courses a year. But what happens in the middle? And we find that a lot of us read books, a lot of us read articles, videos, watch YouTube videos, etc. And that's how we're upskilling ourselves unwittingly, continuously, right? So why don't we offer that in a more interesting, structured way and see if we can do something at INSEAD alongside? So, I talked about, we talked about what the topic would be, like future of executive education, right? So started at physical for the longest time. Online's grown important in the last 10 years or so. COVID gave it huge impetus. Now digital is a part of every executive education journey, but now it's not about companies offering program or training opportunities to executives to do something. It's now about handing the power of learning in the hands of the learner or the executive themselves. So they talk about learning in the flow of work, right? But people want access to knowledge, learning the way they want it, when they want it, how they want it, right? So the power of learning, people are finally realizing it's the learner who determines what they really learn for it to be maximum effective. And that's where the shift is happening in a conscious way. And this platform is an effort towards that. And over time, there's also a possibility that degrees could get unbundled, and you almost have stackable learning modules that you do from one place, second place, third place, and you put it together and showcase to the world how you upskill yourself. So there's a lot of interesting phenomena happening, but it's very interesting to be at INSEAD during all this, because I think business schools have used a certain model for the longest time. But I think with the edtech players coming in and all, I think they need to reinvent themselves pretty fast if they have to, remain relevant in the future. And whether it's going to be a radical shift or not, we'll have to see. So
my first question to you, Swapnil, is that
yes,
are we talking of personalized learning at scale?
I would say yes, right? But again, it's not just about, so personalization carries different meanings right now. I mean, we talk about Netflix personalizing, but there is something more. And I'll go back to something about what Mr. I talked about, data. So in learning, we really don't understand how people actually learn. We assume how people actually learn and we impart learning based on that. I feel there's a whole space of leveraging data and technology to understand how people learn and then delivering personalized learning at scale, right? But will the technology be able to get there? I think that's the question to answer, but the concept is absolutely spot on what you just said.
So, what about is it about co-creation or a creator's economy?
It is about a lot of things. So I feel um, there is a world of academics out there. There is a world of practitioners in the real world. And the two absolutely need to come together and merge in a balanced way. Some people believe academics is what matters. Some people believe academics don't know anything because they're not fast enough and it's all about practitioners. But I think the two are very complementary. And only when you bring the two together is when the learning is complete, right? So yeah, so it could be creators economy, anybody who knows anything, right? But again, the challenge is the world is so full of noise these days, and the challenge is how do you cut through that noise to serve up the most relevant knowledge or information for people? Otherwise, you're just browsing through a ton of noise to decide what you actually want to consume, and it's
I
not very
I couldn't
efficient.
agree more with you. And I suppose another question which comes to my mind is that is it being planned as a free offering, freemium, or a paid model? What kind of a model is
Yeah,
it?
so we're looking at a freemium model. So we one of the attempts is to just aggregate knowledge at INSEAD and put it together. And when I talk about knowledge, it's not just, like I said, it's not just academics, but we'll actually invite practitioners from all over the world to contribute content. So in fact, anybody in this room could actually contribute content to the platform eventually. And this is going to be a subscription model, freemium, like I said, and it'll be at a very radically different price point compared to all the other courses that INSEAD offers. And my hope, vision, dream is that we can, INSEAD talks a lot about being business school of the world and force for good. And my goal is, can we finally use this to reach the world and make something interesting happen? And so for example, we're looking at a business model or similar to Netflix, like a $100, $200 a year kind of subscription. And what we want to do is kind of also incentivize people to that with engagement, can they earn real INSEAD benefits? And could that mean something for their career as well?
Fabulous. Over to you, Aditi.
Yeah, and again, very interesting sort of changes in directions, Swapnil. And I'll go back to your publishing part of your journey first. And both me and my son we write, but I don't think either of us has the patience to create something that a publishing house would be willing to publish. So I'll definitely look up some self-publishing options for the two of us. Now, coming back to learning, it's also very interesting to see how learning has evolved, right? And these days, like back when we were in school or even in college, what we knew was very, very aligned with what we studied in school or in college. And now I see my kids, what they know about a certain topic may have nothing to do with what they're doing in school. So I have, two school age kids, and like they watch videos by influencers like Mark Rober. I don't know if you've heard, but like my 12-year-old will come and tell me something about a topic, which I'm like, wow, how does he know? And he's like, I'm like, did you learn this in school? He's like, no, I watched this Mark Rober video. So yeah, I mean, learning has become so, I guess, democratized, or whatever the right word is, like everybody has access to all kinds of content. So very fascinating. I have kind of two questions for you. And I know one kind of, you mentioned whether the traditional learning mechanisms, whether it's schools, colleges, I mean, I think schools are a much more, established, I want to say, practice, but like, do you see traditional learning going away completely at some point? And again, it may be too soon to predict. And the second part of the question is, especially around executive learning, do you see executive learning more as an incremental, right? Like, I mean, people who are doing whatever job function they're doing, they want to get better at it? Or do you think more of it as an opportunity to pivot? Like somebody working in a certain field wants to do completely different things, like, Pankaj and Susan, everybody, like they all kind of, evolved and transformed and changed their journeys. Like, would that be, something that you think executive learning could offer down the road?
Right. Okay. So let's go each question. Interesting questions, Aditi. So I don't see traditional learning going away anytime soon, right? I mean, 50 years down, maybe, but I think the learning model itself will have to evolve significantly for that to make, happen, because traditional learning had a lot of advantages and offered a lot of things, especially around the social discussion part and just being in a classroom studying things systematically and going about it, right? And I don't think technology has advanced enough to, let's say, replace that completely, right? I mean, yes, in the future possibly it could happen. I like to draw an analogy to this movie called Her. I'm not sure how many of you might have seen it, but basically this person falls in love with an operating system because that operating system is so advanced. That person can understand emotions of the other person and actually relate to that, right? And until technology advances at that level, I think traditional learning is going to be relevant, but it definitely needs to evolve to take advantage of the technology that exists. I mean, simple example, why should a professor walk into a class and repeat the same thing 50 times a year, use technology, record it, watch the lectures, and then use the classroom time, let's say, to have discussions, right? It's a very simple example, but it just takes advantage of what actually exists, right? So that's how I see it. I mean, and I'm talking about, let's say, university education, but I do feel that degrees need to evolve. And I talked about a little bit about stackability and stuff like that, right? I mean, is a 4-year degree actually relevant? Because the pace at which the world is evolving, what you learn in that 4 years may not be relevant at all in the next 4 years. So, or could you almost stretch it to make it lifelong, that you continuously keep evolving that, right? And that degree keeps evolving, right? So what does that mean, right? So there's something there to be thought of. And then so again, like I said, I'm talking about university. I think schools, there's a lot more other things that go on in schools with social learning for children, and because they are in a development stage, and how does that work, right? So again, they are leveraging technology in interesting ways to make it relevant. But I feel schools remain much more relevant in their current state or in the traditional state than, let's say, the universities are. To answer your second question on executive stuff, I think it's both. I feel like the pivot piece is happening in a really big way, because there are new careers out there now which did not exist before, especially around things like digital and AI and let's say data analytics and stuff like that. So they did not exist there, and there are much more opportunities there. Some of the older jobs may even become redundant, and then, like, what do you do, right? So you have to pivot yourself, and I think executive education can play a powerful role in doing that. But I think it also allows people to remain relevant in their current jobs, because they can, let's say, upskill themselves with the latest and greatest, right? So I think it's a mix of both. But I think I do see the pivot happening in a big way. And there's another third phenomena that's happening with learning, and it goes back to what Raghu and Mr. I were talking about, digital transformation. At INSEAD, we almost talk about online learning as a tool for digital transformation, because you can use that as a tool to change mindsets at a very rapid pace, because you can use online learning to deliver certain concepts about change and leadership and all of that at scale, which cannot happen. So it becomes a vehicle of digital transformation. You're not doing digital transformation to it, but you're changing people's mindsets to think about it. And then when you actually take each layer in a corporate and run them all through one program relevant to each layer, suddenly the whole organization aligns in a dramatic fashion, and the digital transformation gets facilitated in a much more powerful. And we've actually done it with companies like, let's say, Schneider Electric and stuff like that with relative success. So there is that thing also. How do you leverage learning to change people's mindsets, especially in an executive world? So that's
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Very fascinating.
Fabulous.
Great. Thank you, Swapnil. Appreciate it.
Over to you, Yogesh.
Hey, Swapnil, this is very interesting. I think the whole concept is very interesting. I have tons of questions, and I probably will get in touch with you later. My son has built a company and sold it off in Singapore, and I think they are probably in some way connected with INSEAD. So I don't know the details, but I have questions which are more of an investor kind of question. Who owns the platform, and what you talked about subscription model? How would you pay the people who create the content and things like that? You can cover some of it here, but we can connect later also.
Yeah. No, so very valid questions. The short answer, we are still figuring it out, like a very classical entrepreneurial innovative problem. But for now, the platform is owned by INSEAD. But again, INSEAD's expertise doesn't lie in platforms, right? But it's a very, the concept we're working on is kind of untested. I mean, there are parts of it which have been tested in the market by different players, but the combination of it hasn't been tested. So we wanted to build an MVP to see what would work and not. And we thought it'd be best to do it. We looked at third-party platforms as well, and none of it fit. So we decided to build it on its own. But given the complexity of functions it will incorporate in the future, one could possibly envision a partnership with a tech player or something like that, right? So that will evolve. And then also to your question about how do you collaborate and compensate the content creators, we're trying to figure it out, whether it's like a royalty model or something like that. I think it'll depend on what's the traction you get and what's the price point that you end up at and how it goes. But the initial thinking, at least with, let's say, internal INSEAD faculty, is about, let's say, just watch and go, and then see what can happen. So it is very much a work in progress, and we try to discover these answers as we go. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'll connect with you. Thank
Fabulous.
You.
So over to you, Raghu.
Swapnil, very exciting what you're trying to do. A few years back, I was one of the early participants when Stanford started its flagship executive program from the Stanford Business School. It's a program called LEAD. I went to that for about a year, and you're in the field, you probably know that well. But one of the things that I've been discussing as gaps with both Stanford faculty from an academic standpoint, as well as in my organization, which is in the energy business, is the fact that if you take a subject as, let's say, the energy transition, the subject is very, very broad. It's extremely dynamic, it's multifaceted, and there is a ton of information available, but very few you could say as a little bit more definitive, structured, and so on and so forth. And I know everywhere these organizations are struggling with those things, right? Sustainability, energy transition, and kind of what are your thoughts to that? Because if, for instance, you read about it all the time, if someone on the street wants a 1 hour module on energy transition, it doesn't seem to exist, right? Very, definitively. So despite so much information is available on the web. So how would you kind of think about that more also from an academic standpoint, from a corporate learning standpoint? Because people hear and read that, but it's very difficult to connect the dots in a very clear and pragmatic manner.
No, so it's Raghu, thank you. This is a very interesting question because it has a couple of angles, right? So let's look at it in a very, let's say, crude way, right? So for example, sustainability is a very hot topic right now because the world is looking at it. And then, but when it comes to hot topics, it actually becomes easier because then business schools move on it. and they finally put together some structured components and it goes out there. Like, so INSEAD is actually working on a program on sustainability right now, for example, right? So I think that's the easier part. But the question that is interesting for me is, how do you cater to the long tail of information for topics which, let's say, may not be as hot in the world, but they still are very relevant to certain industries, certain companies, and all of that. And for that, people find only unstructured stuff because nobody's found the energy to, let's say, invest in producing something structured because they don't see the commercials of it, right? And I think that's the challenge that needs to be overcome. And some of the ed techs are trying to do that. For example, there's this ed tech called Maven.com. It's founded by Gagan Biani, who founded Udemy, and he's kind of creating like a creators cohort-based courses where anybody important in a particular field can create a cohort-based course there. Maybe that could solve the problem, but I'm not sure, right? So I think the question is, do you even solve for the long tail or not? The person who is on the long tail does need that thing solved, but who is actually going to solve it? And the interesting thing is, we have a professor at INSEAD called Phil Parker. Look him up, and he uses machine learning to generate very customized, structured knowledge bases, almost like handouts on books on almost certain topics for literally one person in the world. But he leverages the machine to do that and achieve that. How interesting is, I haven't looked at some of his stuff, so I can't say, let's say, how accurate or useful it is, but he's literally leveraging that to do that. Like, I mean, I'll talk about his use case. So for example, he gives weather reports to farmers on their phones in 500 languages, for example. I've just made that number up, but that's what he does, right? And it becomes very relevant for that person. So I think that's the thing, right? And one of the purposes of the hub that I'm trying to build is exactly to have a credible source for certain topics, so that you don't have to sift through the mine of data that exists on the internet. You don't know what's credible or not. But let's say if INSEAD's curated that, you probably would think it's credible, right? It's a little like Harvard publishing. So I'm not sure it fully answers your question, but I think that's the way I'm thinking about it.
I think this concept of a long tail of a hot subject is indeed very, very hot,
Right.
because the hot subjects tend to go up and down, as we know about cryptos, what is happening currently. But jokes apart, it has been absolutely fabulous to have a chat with you, Swapnil.
Well, thank you
And
so
as I have been telling other leaders, that I will invite you back to join a leaders panel
much.
at a later session. Hmm?
Thank you so much. It was fun chatting with everybody, and yeah, hope it was useful.
So please give a big round of applause to Swapnil. And with that, we come to the end of. We have again gone over time, but the sessions have been so interesting. I mean, I have not wanted to, kind of interject and cut short anyway, because the discussions have been very rich. So to that, I have to thank my speakers, and I have to thank my panel leaders today for making it such an engrossing session. So, folks, with that, this is Pradeep at 1:23 a.m. in Sydney, and I wish you a very, very happy. Oh, I have said that before. Actually, I should now be saying a different thing. I should say, enjoy your morning cup of coffee, afternoon glass of lassi, or the evening glass of wine. And with that, this is Pradeep saying bye to you till episode 32, where we've got to have yet more interesting sessions. Take care and
Yeah.
bye
Thank you,
for
Pradeep.
now.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Pradeep.
Thank you.